What happens when the company that killed Blockbuster decides it wants to become the new Hollywood studio system? Because that is exactly the story playing out this week. Netflix is trying to buy Warner Brothers. Paramount has jumped in with a hostile bid of its own. Regulators are, but Hollywood is asking, is this the moment that the entire industry is quietly rearranging itself into a three-company town? So what just happened? Here is the headline. Netflix has agreed to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery's studio and streaming assets in a deal valued at roughly $72 or $82 billion, depending on how you count the debt. This includes Warner Brothers Pictures, HBO, HBO Max, DC, WBTV, Cartoon Network, one of the most historically important creative engines on the planet. And within days, Paramount, through Skydance, fires back with a hostile all-cash bid of about $108 billion to buy all of Warner Brothers Discovery outright. Warner's board still backs the Netflix deal, but they're now required to carefully review Paramount's offer. So, what started as a clean acquisition has turned into a bidding war with the future of Warner Brothers at stake. That's the home of Casablanca, Harry Potter, The Dark Knight, Barbie, a whole bunch of other assets. It's all caught in the crossfire. So here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. This deal never would have happened in a previous White House administration. Not Republican, not Democrat. Regulators would not have allowed any company, even Netflix, to swallow something as foundational as Warner Brothers. No one at Netflix or Paramount would even have dared to try. They would have been laughed out of the room. But today, there kind of is not a regulatory environment. It is looser or fragmented and politically not happening. And that's exactly why at this moment it is happening right now. So this is not a story about a company buying another company. It is a story of an opportunity created by politics and exploited by strategy and powered by an industry that frankly has kind of reached the breaking point right now. How did we get here? Okay, I am going to do a little history lesson. For decades, we talked about the big six movie studios. After Disney bought Fox, it became the Big Five. Each merger chipped away at the diversity of creative decision-making. Warner Brothers itself has been passed around kind of like a very expensive hot potato. Time Warner to AT&T, and it spun into Warner Media, and it merged with Discovery, burdened now with a ton of debt. And while this was happening, Netflix evolved from being a plucky little DVD by mail service into the global streaming king. It mastered subscriptions, mastered scale, it mastered the art of using data to hold our attention. So today, Netflix wants to become something new, not a streaming platform, not a content buyer, but a full studio system, vertical, global, algorithmically powered. This is why Paramount panicked, right? They're fighting for their own survival. If Netflix gets Warner's, Paramount becomes at best Hollywood's fourth wheel, fourth place finisher. They know it. So now the disruptor is being disrupted, right? Because for years, Netflix prided itself on being the disruptive outsider. They didn't do syndication. They didn't do back-end participation deals. They didn't do theatrical window releases. No messy deals. No legacy obligations. But by buying Warner Brothers, Netflix is signing up for all of it. They got residuals. They're going to have profit participations. They're going to have guild agreements and international licensing deals and theatrical distribution and cable spinoffs and many, many contracts that were written on paper in the early 1990s that they're going to inherit. So that's the irony. The disruptor, Netflix, is walking into the old house it tried to burn down. And now that house still has a mortgage. It has union contracts. It has a memory. Some analysts are already calling this an overreach. It is an enormous, unwieldy corporate python that may not be able to digest what it just swallowed. But let's talk about reality, which is spending, decline, and cost cutting. Netflix promises efficiency. Paramount promises synergies. And historically, what synergies and efficiencies mean in Hollywood business speak is layoffs. We're already estimating like 6,000 job cuts no matter who wins. The Disney-Fox merger eliminated thousands more. Remember, nobody spends $80 or $100 billion to keep things exactly the same as they were. Warner Brothers Discovery is already heavily indebted. Netflix's own investors are jittery. Paramount is bleeding cash. The math is not mysterious. Costs go down, risk narrow, tolerance shrinks, which means fewer films, fewer voices, more sequels and prequels and remakes of things you already know. When studios get scared, originality is the first thing out the door. So let's get to the content why. Harry Potter, DC, Game of Thrones, everything on HBO, all its historical content, all of the deals that it has in place to make in the future. Plus, dude, Mad Max, The Matrix, Looney Tunes, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, the Lord of the Rings films, and a gaming division that includes Hogwarts Legacy and Mortal Kombat. It is a cultural continent. For Netflix, owning Warner Brothers would transform them from content renter into franchise emperor. They wouldn't just be chasing Disney, they would be turning themselves into Disney or bigger than Disney. And for Paramount, buying Warner Brothers would instantly repair their biggest weakness, which is a smaller, aging IP library. So this is not just about money. It is about company gets to shape the next 20 years of global storytelling. Let's zoom out for a moment to business strategy. Where is this money coming from? Because you follow the money, you get a lot of information. And the money tells its own story. On the Netflix side, this is very much a Wall Street deal. Netflix has lined up $59 billion in unsecured bridge loan to fund the cash portion of its offer for Warner's Discovery. And that loan is being underwritten by three big banks, Wells Fargo, BNP Paribas, and HSBC. Money nerdy is global politics nerdy, as you're going to see in a minute. Here we go. That bridge loan is exactly what it sounds like. It's temporary money. The plan is to push a lot of that into the global bond markets over time, essentially asking investors around the world to buy Netflix debt so it can keep this acquisition on its balance sheet. It's already seeing record activity in the M&A bond market as companies rush to lock in financing like this. The rest of Netflix's offer is stock. Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders are being promised about $23 in cash plus about $4 in Netflix shares for each WBD share, and that adds up to about $72 billion of equity, valued about $82 billion in debt, et cetera. So that comes into a global loan package arranged by major Western banks, and the equity comes from Netflix issuing new shares, which will dilute existing Netflix shareholders, but they'll pull Warner shareholders into the Netflix tent. So there's no public indication at this point that sovereign wealth funds or foreign state investors are backing Netflix's big directly. It is a classic corporate finance, banks, bonds, public markets. Now, global politics, Paramount Skydance thing looks really different. Paramount's hostile offer, all cash, $30 a share. It values Warner's Discovery at about $108 billion at how you count. But to get there, there's about $40 billion of equity from the Ellison family and Redbird Capital, deep-pocketed U.S. private capital. But on top of that, you have foreign sovereign wealth funds. Funds from Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, providing about $24 billion at least in financing for the bid. Was also a billion-dollar commitment from Tencent, which is the Chinese tech giant, but that was withdrawn after there was concerns that that involvement would actually trigger a U.S. national security review. So you see, this is all global politics. And then, just like Netflix, Paramount is going to need a mountain of debt. So Paramount Skydance has already lined up about $54 billion in bridge financing from Bank of America, and Citigroup, and Apollo to cover the rest. Now, here's the delicate part. Because of U.S. national security rules, the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds have agreed to give up any rights to participate in Warner Brothers management if Paramount wins. So officially, they are just financial investors. Unofficially, it does mean something else too. If Paramount prevails, tens of billions of dollars from Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar will be helping to determine who owns one of the most powerful storytelling engines in the world, even if they don't sit on the board. But meanwhile, if Netflix prevails, the power center is more traditional. American and European banks and global bond investors, and a public company whose stock is almost in every index fund on Earth. Either way, this isn't just about Hollywood money anymore. It's about global capital, state funds, private equity, mega banks, all converging on the same prize. Not only Warner Brothers films and shows, but also the data and the influence that come with them. And when you look at it that way, you realize this fight isn't just over who makes the movies. It's about who finances the movies. And by extension, who gets long-term economic stakes in what the world watches and talks about and eventually believes. Okay, so let's get skeptical for a minute about if this is even practical, because this is my question. Can Netflix really run all of this? Inside Netflix, I've talked to people, some of them were actually saying the same question. Do we actually know how to run a sprawling legacy union-heavy studio? Warner Brothers isn't a tech acquisition. It is a living ecosystem, 35,000 employees, entrenched workflows, theatrical distribution pipeline, international broadcasters, deeply human creative cultures. Here's what gets even more interesting. Some people I've talked to believe that Netflix isn't even understand how to grapple with Warner's business, how to make money, how many people it takes, how political the process is in Hollywood, how chaotic it can be developing a feature film or a premium drama. Netflix built itself on predictability. Warner Brothers runs on chaos. This marriage might require therapy, and there's a history of mergers in Hollywood that do not work and subsequently had to be unwound. AOL and Time Warner, AT&T and Time Warner, Vivendi and Universal, News Corp and MySpace, Disney and Maker Studios, Comcast and DreamWorks Animation. Each one had differences from this one, but the point is that not all mega mergers stay merged. But if this happens, and something will happen, there will be a marketing bottleneck. Too much of a good thing, maybe. Netflix already has like more titles than any marketing department meaningfully support, right? And Warner Brothers, that mix of HBO and Warner Films and WB-TV, and it hits a tidal wave of content. Not everything can be promoted. Not everything will be discovered. Some films will simply get out of oxygen. This is where cultural cost comes in, where it gets real. When one company controls the spotlight, countless other stories remain in the dark. It becomes a buyer's market, at least for now, right? For a decade, Netflix paid top dollar to outside studios to build its library. If it owns Warner Brothers, well, that era is over. It won't need to buy as much external content. And when it does, it doesn't need to overpay. Independent filmmakers and small studios, people who are already struggling, they're going to feel this first. Fewer buyers, harder terms, less competition, lower prices. A supersized Netflix doesn't just change the business, it changes the bargaining power of everyone who creates for a living, which is bad news for studios and the future of cinema, right? We've gone from many studios to 6 to 5, and now maybe 3 major ecosystems controlling most of American film and premium television. Disney and Netflix or Paramount, plus Warner Brothers, and then there's Comcast Universal. The studio landscape is shrinking, and when the number of gatekeepers falls, so does the quality and diversity of the stories they're willing to tell in greenlight. And that brings me to something even more serious. This is the real story, the story behind the story, data. Power, algorithm of belief. Remember, like, follow, and share, because we got to talk about this. And here is the other part that nobody is talking about, except we're talking about it right now. This deal is not just about movies or IP. It is about data, user data, viewing data, behavioral data, attention data. If Paramount or Netflix acquire Warner Brothers, and remember, Paramount and Oracle have the same bankroll, it gains the ability to aggregate and analyze vast amounts of personal information across streaming, gaming, mobile, potentially theatrical ecosystems. And the data centers that Netflix will build to support this, or the data centers that Oracle already has and will have more of, they're not movie warehouses. They are cognitive infrastructure. Owning this much data means one thing: the power to micro-target down to individual person what we see, what we click, what we watch, and ultimately what we come to believe is true. Stories shape our worldview. And when a single company can algorithmically decide what stories appear in front of us, the line between entertainment and influence becomes really thin. This is why we should care, not because we dislike mergers, because we value free imagination. So let us turn to us. I am not anti-technology. I am not anti-progress. I am not anti-business, but I deeply favor creative diversity and voices because it keeps our culture honest. So what can we do? Go to the movies, show up for films in theaters when you can, support independent artists, champion international voices, and stay alert, very alert about who owns your attention. Because right now, Netflix and Paramount are fighting over who gets to own Warner Brothers, but the real question is, the one that should matter to us is, who gets to own our stories? And the answer to that should not be left to a handful of corporations or an algorithm steering a billion screens. Come back for more, because we're going to follow this together. Because the answer to this should not be left to corporations or a few people or an algorithm streaming to billions of screens, but streaming very specific information that might just be targeted to you. We're going to keep talking about this because this is what matters. I hope this has been useful, trying to unpack what's really going on. Let me know in the comments, and come on back for more.